something has to give, as yet another new report has come out revealing some Pittsburgh Penguins that will no longer be on the team once the season starts. We're going to break down that, as well as the return the Penguins could get for some of these players and what trades make sense and who will actually be on this roster this season. We're going to break it all down in this episode of Penguins Digest. But before we do that, a quick reminder to hit that subscribe button. About 68% of you who watch these videos are not subscribed to the channel. So if you want to stay up to date with everything that's happening with the Pittsburgh Penguins, go down below, hit that free subscribe button. And again, you get to stay up to date with everything that's happening with the Pittsburgh Penguins as we creep closer to a pretty exciting, I think, training camp and preseason. But once the season starts, there's a lot of question marks, Mark. And I think, there's been a lot of reports. There's been a lot of talk about who's going to get traded from the Pittsburgh Penguins and what for, and is it even going to happen at this point? And I do believe it's going to happen. And the Bleacher Report released their list of NHL trade block, who's on the NHL trade block around the league, who's available. And the Penguins have a lot of players ranked very highly in terms of who's actually going to get moved. And I thought that was very interesting. Now, first one on the list, or lowest, I should say, at number 12 is Tristan Jarry. I think this is more unlikely for the Pittsburgh Penguins, at least to start the year. They went out and acquired a backup goaltender in Artur Shilovs. That is the plan, I think, at least right now. I think the plan for Shilovs is for ultimately him to become the starting goaltender of the team. But do you think it makes much sense to try and trade Tristan Jarry right now? I think they're going to try and ride him into the season, see how he does as the starting goaltender of this team. We have seen flashes of him being a great borderline elite goaltender in this league. A lot of people thought he was going to win the Vezina at one point. So do you think it makes much sense for them to trade this player right now? Because personally, I don't think it does. And I think you just kind of see how the season goes.
I think you can look at it two ways. If a team calls, they're desperate, and they're offering a prospect and a pick, I feel like you need to go for it. But the big thing is you need a goaltender to come back. Listen, Shilovs is incredible. We love to see him joining this team and hopefully become the goaltender of the future. But the big thing is, if someone like the Edmonton Oilers called and said, hey, we'll give you Calvin Pickard and a second-round pick, I feel like you almost need to move on from it. This is a big contract. Yes, you can bank on a bounce back year where we've seen Jarry have very good seasons. If he bounces back, you either ride him into the sunset and hopefully win another cup with him or increase his trade value. But at the very moment, I don't think any team is really desperately looking at Jarry and saying, hey, we're going to give up assets. And I don't think Dubas is in the comfortable spot to attach something to move on from it. So I think, like you said, you kind of stand pat. Hopefully things turn around and revisit a trade farther into the season.
Yeah, I'm not saying he's not going to get traded by the time that his contract is up, but I think at least to start the season, he's going to be a Pittsburgh Penguin. But again, the Edmonton Oilers are an interesting one. That would be one team for sure that I know could be interested in Tristan Jarry. Now, this is where it gets very interesting. Number 3 on the list, and it's pretty obvious at this point. We've covered it a lot. Rickard Rakell. I think this guy makes a lot of sense for a lot of teams out there. The Penguins, obviously, and Kyle Dubas want to get younger. I think the roster heading into this year is actually a lot better than people realize. It could get a lot worse, obviously, if they trade Rickard Rakell and one other guy on this list. He's heading into year 4 of 6 of this 6-year contract. He has 3 years left on this deal at $5 million for 70 points. There's players around the league that are making $10 million with the same production. I know he's a little bit older, but this is very attractive for a lot of teams around the league. You get a player who's under control, security, and that way he only makes $5 million for that point production, and he put up those points on a Pittsburgh Penguins team that wasn't that good. So what do you make of this one? I think this is more likely. I think this is the most likely candidate to be traded from the Pittsburgh Penguins, and it could actually come before the season starts.
And I think the biggest thing with Rakell is Dubas is looking at a player that had a career year. Yes, playing in the top 6, playing with Sidney Crosby does help this, but coming off 70 points, 35 goals, Rakell had an incredible season. And when looking into the cap hit even more, this is one of the best value contracts in the league. Any title contender, any team that's going in to make a noise into the playoffs is going to call on this guy. And I think Dubas, if it's not to start the year in camp or just to start the season when game 1 puck drops, this is going to be a guy, a hot commodity that everyone in the league is going to call on. And I think someone's going to end up putting an offer out that Dubas cannot turn down.
Absolutely. And I think that, again, he's the most likely candidate for me in terms of who the Penguins should give up and in terms of who other teams want, because he makes a little bit less than the next guy we're going to cover, who is Bryan Rust, number 1 on the list, and for good reason. And I think that, again, Rickard Rakell makes sense for the Pittsburgh Penguins, but Bryan Rust makes a lot of sense for a lot of teams out there. He makes a little bit more of $5.125 million. Exact same contract, essentially. He's in year 4 of 6. He has 3 years left, so it's attractive in that way. He's 33, so of course you have to take that into account. But to me, I wouldn't trade Bryan Rust. And the reason for that is because he's won a Stanley Cup with the Pittsburgh Penguins. He instills that culture into some of the younger players. That's the reason Sidney Crosby wants to stick around too. His new purpose, which is not winning championships, at least in his eyes, I think, and it's to help usher in this new era of Pittsburgh Penguins players with, this winning mindset and how to win and know how to win and be a winner in the NHL. So he brings that as well. And I think if you start trading away guys like that, you're going to start to lose that, because Malkin, we know, probably is done after this year. So for that reason, I wouldn't trade him. But Mark, what do you make of that? Obviously, there's a lot of mock trades out there. I think Bryan Rust would be a perfect fit for the Toronto Maple Leafs and what they're trying to accomplish with the salary cap and all of that. And I think Kyle Dubas could get a lot of really good young players back, like a Nick Robertson, maybe a draft pick. Maybe you're talking about a goaltender in return, and Dennis Hildeby as well. That's been floated out there. But what do you make of Bryan Rust? To me, I wouldn't trade him, but I know you would get a lot in terms of return for this player.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is when looking at Rakell, an incredible season, 35 goals, but I do like looking at Russ in the sense, the playoff experience, knowing what it takes to win around the league, scoring 31 goals. Yes, the production might be a little lower. Yes, he might be a tad bit older, but at the end of the day, teams want to get players that can give you experience in the playoffs. Look at the Florida Panthers going in. They went out to pick up Brad Marchand, and he was a key piece and one of the reasons why he almost won the Conn Smythe with them. In the playoffs, getting guys that want to win, have experience, and can still play is something someone's going to look at. And like the mock trade says, this would cost a boatload. You're going to get a young player, maybe a roster player, a bit of a salary cap dump, a first, and still even more. I think it's going to really come down to how much Dubas really values adding more young talent. Yes, they have a lot of young guys coming through the system, but Dubas is going to constantly get calls the closer you get to deadline, when there's only about a year and a half less and you can still retain, or the cap looks even smaller. I think he's going to almost get pride to the point that one of these guys, or both, will be off the roster after we see the trade deadline pass. And it's going to be interesting what kind of route we see Pittsburgh going with Crosby and the rest of the core.
Absolutely, and I think that you bring up a good point. What will this team look like at the trade deadline? Because Kyle Dubas has come out and said, besides all the stuff that we do know, came out and said that they're going to have checkpoints this season. They're going to check in around Christmas. They're going to check in around the Olympic break, around the trade deadline. How's Malkin feeling? How's Crosby feeling? Do you want to be traded, right? Do you want to be traded if you're Bryan Rust? Do you want to be traded if you're Rickard Rakell? Again, I think there is one move, and we didn't even touch on Erik Karlsson in this video. I think there is one move coming before the season starts, so stay tuned for that. Are they going to trade all of these guys? I don't think they're trading all of them, but I could see 2 out of 4 possibly being moved at some point this season. So it's going to make for very interesting storylines, of course. And I do see one being traded before the season starts, and I do think it should be Rickard Rakell. But let us know what you think in the comments. Should it be Rakell? Should it be Rust? Do you want Erik Karlsson gone? Is it Tristan Jarry? Could it be the guy selling popcorn in the 14th row? Let us know in the comments below. We want to hear what you have to say. And if you haven't yet, hit that subscribe button so you can stay up to date with everything Pittsburgh Penguins.